person that's here currently. We're gonna wait on a couple others, and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very soon.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very soon.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very soon.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very soon.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very
We're
soon.
gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very
We're
soon.
gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here
start
currently.
very soon.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
and then we will
for that one person that's here currently.
Okay.
We're gonna wait on a couple others,
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, or just gentlemen, maybe. Okay. So, or just gentlemen, maybe. Okay. So, I'm hoping the audio isn't looping anymore. I'm hoping.
Okay.
So, I'm hoping the audio isn't looping anymore. I'm hoping.
Okay.
So, I'm hoping the audio isn't looping anymore. I'm hoping.
Okay.
So, I'm hoping the audio isn't looping anymore. Okay, it is. I'm hoping. No more desktop audio. Okay. That seems to fix the problem. Anyways, let me turn off. Let me, boom. Okay. So, welcome. So there were 4 let's get this started. So, the Denver, New Orleans. The Denver, New Orleans, well, it was a railroad. It was a railroad that is technically important to the United States, sort of. Yeah. But, basically, what is the Denver, New Orleans? So, first let me explain who are the two gentlemen who are on screen currently. We have to the left, we have David Moffett. He, if you know railroads, he would build the Denver Salt Lake line. He would build the Denver New Orleans, this railroad, and he would also be a railroad baron for the Denver Rio Grande. So yeah. So. So, um, in and okay. So let me explain what the Denver New Orleans actually is. So it was a railroad that went south from Denver, went along the plains of Colorado, because Denver and Rio Grande Western was very unfriendly to it, and they did not want to. They didn't want to share the joint line. They didn't want to share their little line south from Denver. If you're wondering, the time period is around 1881 when this is happening. So, LeGrand would have just made it to Silverton when this is all going down. So, and David Moffett and John Evans had a similar dream to William Jackson Palmer, which was get down to the Gulf of Mexico. But that was the original charter. The charter shoot turned down just to Pueblo, Colorado. And if this next slide, which, if you're wondering what all these towns are, so Denver, South Denver University, Yeah, all these are all towns that were on the line, and um, there's a couple that still exist. Let me back. Yeah, sorry, stream is strange. Anyways, so we have Denver, which of course is the capital of Colorado today. Um, so this would have left around South Denver Yard. It would have been South Denver Yard where a train would leave. Oh, hey, Cade. Caden has decided to join us. Anyways, so basically, David Moffat and John Evans had a dream: get down to the Gulf of Mexico. But unlike the Denver Rio Grande, which the Denver Rio Grande wanted to do it with 3-foot narrow gauge, they wanted to do it with standard gauge this time. So Evans, who was the territorial governor at the time, as well as Moffat, decided to build a route. Now the thing is that the Denver Rio Grande was not friendly whatsoever to this railroad. Nobody was really to the Denver New Orleans when it was first being built. So they had to take a differing route. So if you know anything about the Denver Rio Grande, you would know it goes down through Littleton into Castle Rock, down to Colorado Springs, and a bunch of other stuff. But what the route the Denver New Orleans had to take, because of the very unfriendly Rio Grande, is this next slide right here. So right here would be where Highway 85 onto I-25 is. That is where the DNRG line was. That's the line currently. That is the Colorado Joint Line today. Glad to see you too, Red Line Overload. So, if you're wondering, he actually did help with a lot of this. He gathered a lot of the links that I used because I had to get information quickly and I didn't have time really to do. Yeah. But basically, this is where the modern joint line is. So it would go down to Colorado Springs that way. What the New Orleans had to do is, luckily there's a map that exists and it is linked in the sources page for this. But basically, it would head south from Denver, and they would have to go through what is today University Park, Connors, and a bunch of other stuff. Then through Cherry Creek Reservoir, all the way down into Parker, and from Parker over Silver Gulch up to 4% to Hilltop, which is right here, down into Ponderosa Park, around Whiskey Gulch to Elizabeth, upgrade a bit to Cameron, and descend down into the valley to Elbert, through Elbert Valley into Eastonville, then come out into Falcon, and then come to Franceville Junction, where you have your one leg. This leg goes into Colorado Springs, which we could see here, and that actually would be the connection the Colorado Midland would take to go up from Colorado Springs into the mountains. But also here we have the Y, and this goes down. This continues down to Pueblo, which is on this one. So we could see continues all the way down, overlaps with the Grand a little bit, but they did get fairly close. This is probably their closest around Fountain, then from Wigwam all the way down. Then here in Pueblo, there's so many rail lines converging on this map that it just shows all of them. But then we have this, which this was a little spur to the Franceville line. So if you live in Colorado and you live around this area, you would know that's the Ram Off-Road Park. But right here, this is where the Denver and New Orleans had the Franceville branch, which was just a coal mine that they served for a little bit. You have the Colorado Springs, and yeah. So, let me. So yeah. So and then during I think they started construction in October of 1881. I know it was late 1881. So between September and December 1881, they started construction south from Denver, and I think by 1882 they made it to Elizabeth. And the reason I'm using Elizabeth is because besides Colorado Springs, it is the third biggest town on the line that was directly served. Okay, not Colorado Springs, but Colorado Springs was a branch line, believe it or not. Hello, the railroad guy, or Ben. So, yeah. So this giant line. But yeah, so Elizabeth is probably the biggest town still around today on the line, besides Parker, Harmon Springs, Denver, and Pueblo, of course. But it's the smallest of the bigger towns. But it is still around. Oh, hey, Tom. So, we journey further south, and we get closer to the end of the beginning of the New Orleans line. So, I haven't really explained what the Denver New Orleans was. I don't know if official Coloradans haven't, but what this railroad was is it was basically just David Moffett and John Evans wanting to go south from Denver. But how I see it, I see this as sort of the beginning of modern Colorado railroading. And you might be wondering, well, didn't the Denver Rio Grande do that? Nope. They didn't do that. Because this was the first standard gauge railroad south from Denver. And by 1882, they did hit Pueblo. I think it almost took it took about a year to get to Pueblo. So, but it's because this railroad was standard gauge. The only other railroad, which was the Denver and Rio Grande, which went and this way along the I-25 corridor today, and still runs. That's the joint line still. That is perhaps this was the first railroad that made the change to standard gauge, because this railroad would spur the Colorado Midland, which climbed up these directions in this general direction. You had then you had the Rio Grande and ATSF, which ATSF is actually very important in the story. So let's continue on to part 2. So this is 1883 to 1886. This is when the railroad, the Denver New Orleans, I should say, was at its peak as a railroad. But it did have its problems. So, it ran about 5 trains a day. Most of the locomotives that I've heard were running and have seen art and paintings on were either 440s, or American locomotives, as they're known as, or American type locomotives, or 10-wheelers, which are 460s. And those are really those are really what, if you are in Discord with me, you would know that I say 10-wheelers a lot more than 440s, but generally early Denver New Orleans had 440s, maybe later in its life, around 1886, it got the 460s. And, and in Pueblo, during its agreement to only go down to Pueblo, because that's the agreement it made, it went down and connected with the Fort Worth and Denver City Railroad, which sort of important, sort of not. It's confusing, especially in this next part. But um, yeah. So it was a good little railroad. The only problem it had is that it occasionally had to wash out because this railroad was full of bridges. There were bridges from Denver to Pueblo. I think I heard in the actual Denver, New Orleans, and the Shadow of the Rockies DVD, which is one of my sources, is that there were over 300 bridges, like 350 bridges that were along this line. So you could imagine that, especially because I'm most familiar with this section right here of the line, and reasons. That's why I'm building it in rolling line. But this Whiskey Gulch, I think, was like 50% a bridge during its time of operation. It was mostly a bridge. Today, when you drive up County Road 13, which is this, you can barely see it, but it's this little line right here that my mouse is sort of on. That is 13. And basically, you could still see in a lot of the neighborhoods. I have some friends that live in this area. You can see where bridges were. And there were, and yeah, and then from here, the Hilltop to Parker, you from around Hilltop, you run right next to the line, and then on from Hilltop Road all the way down, you run on top of the line, and then right here would be Sulphur Gulch, which was 357 feet of bridge, and I think was the biggest bridge on the line. I believe it was, at least. I don't know. Something. This railroad has been gone since 1937. Leave me alone. Sorry. But, yeah. So, yeah. And if you're wondering, these images are actual images of places. So this was Elbert, Colorado. So that is right there. There's Elbert. So that was it around this time period. Here's Elizabeth. This is in my high school. You can go in there and see this image. And it's been dated 1885. So this is late New Orleans era. But this is Elizabeth. And today, there's trees all over this, but this was a logging camp back in the day, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But today, trees cover this entire hill from top to bottom. And then this is Parker. It's very flat. Not like Parker today. Nothing like today's Parker. So, yeah. So, there's something I do want to address. So, when I was looking through information, I was sent by Fishman, as he's known as on here, he's known as Redline Overload on YouTube, but he sent me this little thing, which I'm not going to be able to show it because I don't want to get attacked by copyright, but basically there's a document out there that supposedly there was a lawsuit of some sort or legal action of some sort taken against the Denver, New Orleans by the ATSF Railroad. So, interesting little thing that I didn't know about until fairly recently. So yeah, so let's continue on, because unfortunately around 1886 railroad went into bankruptcy. Because yeah, you could be the first railroad south from Denver, you could be funding the Colorado Midland Railroad, you could be basically the standard gauge lifeline for most of southern Colorado, but it doesn't last forever. Which goes into part 3, tumbling into the Colorado and Southern. So if you're wondering, the original Denver New Orleans route for the first few months of the Colorado and Southern's existence was the main line. But we have to start somewhere, which in 1887 a new railroad was formed. That railroad being a combination of the Fort Worth and Denver City Railroad, which I cannot remember. I think it's like the Denver and Fort Worth Railroad, something like that. But basically, this was just a combination of the two railroads, which the Fort Worth and Denver City was coming out of Fort Worth, Texas, of course. And basically, this would form the southern leg of Colorado railroading. And the New Orleans was the connection to Denver, and then blah 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 blah. So, but the Union Pacific and General Grenville Dodge wanted to combine. They wanted to have this section of track sort to themselves, because if you didn't know, the UP actually funded the first railroad down into Denver. I can't remember what that railroad's called, but they had a bunch of railroads, including Colorado and Central, and a couple other railroads. And they had the Fort Worth and Denver. You had the Denver and Fort Worth Railroad, which was the ex-Denver New Orleans, and they had a bunch of railroads between in Wyoming and in Colorado, throughout Colorado, and into Texas and New Mexico. So what they decided to do is in I believe it was 1889, they combined the railroads into one railroad, which, as you can see here, is the Union Pacific, Denver, and Gulf Railroad. And if you're wondering, what are these images? So this is a important plant that was in Pueblo, a steel plant that was in Pueblo, and that basically Denver, New Orleans was making most of its money off of this, and then they went bankrupt, and then this was still the moneymaker. But then they combined and made a multi-state railroad, which is the Union Pacific, Denver, and Gulf Railroad. They basically, it was strange. The Denver and the Union Pacific, Denver, and Gulf was a really strange railroad. There's a lot of history on it because it would become the Colorado and Southern, but again, there wasn't. If you're wondering, this photo was, I think, it says early 1900s on that. I personally believe it could be anywhere from 1885 to 1900, because it does say Colorado and Southern, but of course the Colorado and Southern didn't come until 1889, so technically it falls into this period. But anyways, so so, and basically it was doing good up until 1893, when the silver industry came crashing down because of an act, which I can't remember the name of, but it happened. But because of that, Union Pacific went bankrupt, and this became another railroad. I can't remember the name of that railroad. I think it stayed the UP D&G for a bit. I can't remember. But if you're wondering, this railroad was the Colorado and Southern before the Colorado and Southern. And in 1899, I can't remember who came on Joel, but it finally became the Colorado and Southern, which leads us to part 4, a joint line. So you might be wondering, well, what is this image? Because this one, that's Elizabeth, that's Pueblo, that's somewhere on the Denver Union Pacific and Denver Gulf Railroad. That's a sign. What does this have in relation? Notice that it's the same year that the Colorado and Southern came into existence, and there's a train. What you may not know is that that's an ATSF locomotive pulling a Colorado and Southern train. Remember that joint line I was talking about that went through here? Well, by the 1890s, the ATSF had made it to Denver. So in the of course we heard about it in the Denver New Orleans segment of this, that the ATSF got into a lawsuit with the Denver New Orleans somehow. I don't know if the Denver New Orleans just looked at them funny or what. Yeah, so we can see, but yeah, so basically they chose a very similar route to the Rio Grande. I think almost the exact same. That's why it's called the joint line. But basically they made a deal which basically cut off this entire section of the railroad. And it also basically made the entire Denver New Orleans useless. So this, by 1899 or 1889, I should say, Franceville was already empty, so this spur didn't really exist anymore, although you can still see track bed and stuff. But basically, this entire thing became very useless because of the first version of the Colorado joint line. So, and the trains went from 3 a day to 3 a week. Literally cut in half train schedules. So you would get probably one every couple of days, and then it would be gone. And you could say this was the beginning of the end of the Denver, New Orleans, and John Evans' Dream Railroad. This was the beginning of the end. When 1889 rolled around, and then this agreement was made. So now we set in to the downfall era. This, we will be talking about this image. This is Eastonville, Colorado, which, you know what, we have that, no, Eastonville is right here, so that it still exists, so boom. But we go all the way back, so that's Eastonville back then, and it used to be one of the biggest potato producers, turns out, so yay. Anyways, so today, yeah, basically the Denver and New Orleans line went into complete disarray. They started replacing a lot of the ties and spikes and stuff with narrow gauge stuff, because of course Colorado Southern had narrow gauge. That is one of the more famous things about the Southern, is that it had narrow gauge. So a lot of this branch's stuff, which was standard gauge, got replaced with narrow gauge crap. So, yeah, and it's a bit sad in my opinion, if I do say so myself. It's a bit sad that this line went into complete disarray, because now if you look back on it, it's the only reason why the Denver and Rio Grande standard gauge. It was the only reason why the ATSF made it to Denver. It was the only reason the Colorado Midland made it into the Rockies, causing the basically it removed a narrow gauge from southern Colorado along the Front Range. Boom, I said it, deal with it. And I know a couple of you that are watching are like, well, he's probably going to mention the narrow gauge at some point. Yeah, boom, there, I did it. It killed off the narrow gauge along the front range. Boom, done. So, yeah, it murdered the front range narrow gauge. So, in 1917, because of course, why would you have a line back to the map? Why would you have a line that does this? You have the Rock Island, which I think came in the 1890s, pierced through and is in Colorado Springs, and it's in a better place than you. Franceville Junction doesn't exist anymore. Practically this stretch of track is in disrepair. Why? So 1917 rolls around, they're like, boop. And basically, this entire section, this section is still in use. This small section from Colorado Springs is still used. But from this Y south, it just falls into disrepair. Yes, yeah, oh yeah, he's gonna watch this and he's gonna be pissed because I'm disrespecting his railroad. So, yeah. So, that just happened. Basically, they said, screw you, we're cutting you off, and thus, rip everything south of Falcon, except for Colorado Springs, and then a single street in Erie, in Pueblo, called Erie Street, which we'll get to in the next one. So, yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah, he has to cope with Denver and New Orleans converting him to standard gauge. Anyways, so, yeah. So, rip everything south of Falcon in 1917. But 1919 rolls around. It was either 1919 or 1929. That rolls around. I can't remember which. That's one of those two dates. It's one of those 2 years that they attempt to run a doodlebug, or a motor as they're known as also, from Parker to Elizabeth along this branch. You want to know what happens? It starts the grade up the hilltop and it's doing very well. Oh wait, now it's stalling out on the hill, near the bottom of the hill. Yeah, sorry, that was to the theme of Sink the Bismarck by Johnny Horton, but the doodlebug stalls out on the grade. And like completely stalls out and can't move on the grade because of how steep the 4% is. Like, yeah, you thought Saluda grade was brutal. It was either 2% or 4%. Yeah, it's a hilltop. I can't remember. It's one of those two. But basically, the grade was that brutal that the doodlebug couldn't even make it up, and steam locomotives could. So yeah. So very, very bad thing about the Denver, New Orleans, right there. But the doodlebugs couldn't do it. But eventually they could. So, yeah. And then we can talk about this image right here. This image is an image of Elbert, Colorado, a couple days after the flood of 1935. If you're wondering, along the Kiowa Creek, which is this, it follows Kiowa all the way to Elbert, and also in Bennett, which is somewhere up here. Or something. Yeah. Anyways. But, the flood waters came down from Kiowa. There's a report that says a man was sitting on the top of the hill with a younger boy, and he was like, "There goes my house." and that was as Elbert got completely destroyed. So basically, I think Connors, Colorado, got almost. I know points along between Elizabeth and Elbert got completely destroyed in the line. Um, eh, Basically everything south of Elbert got destroyed, except like between Elbert and Falcon, I think got like completely wiped out. Like Eastonville, a bunch of other stuff got completely wiped. Because if you don't know where the road goes down through Elbert today, was where the railroad once was, and there is a photo that I tried to find. I tried to find to put in this where it was just a boxcar sitting there because there was a parade and something something something. Yeah. So Elbert is completely flooded and rip the railroad. But that's not where the story ends. Because they go the the Colorado and Southern builds back to Elbert from Elizabeth, and basically about a year later they say we can't. This branch is worthless now. We can't get to Eastonville. We don't have a reason to be in Falcon. Get rid of it. So they get rid of the branch from Falcon. They get rid of the branch from Falcon, yeah. They get rid of everything up to Connors, Colorado. And yeah. So in the 60s, I believe, there this is the spur at Connors. Basically, it was just for a couple of mills that were still along the line at that point, because those still existed at that point, and basically they were just getting milled. They were just doing that, and when like I think it was Burlington Northern at this point that made a decision to close down that spur. No, it was still Colorado and Southern, or Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, I should say. They decided to close down the Connors spur, and if you're wondering, go up. Like right here is about Connors. This is like where University Park is and stuff. So right here is about Connors. So this entire part of the branch of the line was still open. If you're wondering, this basically all of this in purple is the railroad. So yeah. So basically that part was open, and also a little road running, which led to a liquor area down in Pueblo, which is on Erie Street, and that was opened and running up until. Yeah, also a paper mill was there, and unfortunately, the photos that I could have gotten were copyrighted, and I didn't want to face that. So yeah, but basically there are photos, you could look them up, of Santa Fe and Burlington Northern doing street running operations in Pueblo on what is today Erie Street, and basically that was the Denver, New Orleans' last pieces of trackage that were still in use. And in 1999, the city of Pueblo said, "We're scrapping you." Now we jump to probably my easiest part, the easiest part of the string for me and everyone else today. So, what is left of this railroad today? Well, this piece of trackage. It's a trail you can walk on. It's public. It's between El Paso and Elbert counties. It's between Elbert and Eastonville. Basically, it's a section of Elbert Road would be this direction. Basically, you could walk, and that's a grade. That's the grade of the Denver, New Orleans. Basically, I just shoved as many images as I could onto this one slide because I didn't want to make this too long because there's a lot of stuff I could have put on here. But you had this little outline, if you can see it. This is the roadbed of the Denver, New Orleans. You can still see it. So this is Elizabeth High. There's the town of Elizabeth. And then here's sort of another view of it. Or no, never mind. This isn't another view of it. This is, so down here would be Elbert. And you would go up. This is where Cameron, Colorado would be. Right here. So this is where Cameron would be. And it goes here and it follows 106 for a bit. And then there's Elbert Road right here. There's the cemetery somewhere around here. This is Connors. Now, if you're wondering, Connorsburg was actually thought they were going to actually turn into a commuter service spur. So they kept some of the tracks there. But unfortunately, those tracks today still lay in disarray. Although a light rail segment does run under it. Under the original tracks up to I-25. If you're wondering what this is the section house. This is the last remaining building. Today it is preserved. There are markings on the side of it that state what it is. But this is the last remaining building of the Denver, New Orleans to be in existence. This is the Denver, New Orleans section house in Elizabeth, Colorado, and you can go and visit it today. But this is the only thing that still exists today for it. This is the only building that exists on the line still. No water towers, no nothing. Parker, there are or were some remnants left. You can go visit Sulphur Gulch. There are stuff. There are bridge supports for that bridge. Of course, you could see a lot of the grade between Parker, Elizabeth, and Elbert. You could see a lot of the grade between Eastonville Road is a part of the old grade, as well as Hilltop Road is part of the old grade today. Parker's Main Street is a part of the grade. What else? Erie Street, of course, is old road grade. There's not actually a whole lot of it left. There's very few. But if you are wondering, you can actually go to places. If you ask the owners, you can go onto their property. And the railroad did. The car owners did a horrendous job of cleaning up when they did abandon the branch in 37. So, you could still find spikes and pieces of coal. I have a spike of my own. My entire school actually has a bucket of spikes, because we may or may not live on the main line. And no, it's not legend. Thank God. That is something. Anyways, but yeah, so this is what basically the railroad has a lot of leftover spikes and stuff and pieces of coal and stuff you can find today. But there's only one building, being the Denver, New Orleans section house in Elizabeth, Colorado. And then Connors is the only place where ties, rail, and track are still left. You can see the roadbed still. You can see where Cameron, Colorado, excuse me. This is where Cameron was. And this would go north to Elizabeth. There's Elizabeth. This would go north to Elbert. This would go south to Eastonville. That's coming towards us. The road bed would have been right behind it in Elizabeth. Today, most of Main Street and some buildings cover that up, so you can't get back there really anymore. So yeah. Um, well, I hope you enjoyed the stream, folks. Here's all my sources. If you want to look any of these up, these are all sources I used for this. Um, so yeah. Um, so I hope you guys had a good stream. If you're wondering, I did post a link in the description, and this link is of the is of a Discord server. But what I want of this Discord server is basically the compile any and all information, sort of make it like a history archive of the Denver, New Orleans. So yeah, I hope to see you all in my next stream, which we will probably be repairing what I did to Elizabeth because it isn't accurate whatsoever. But yeah. So I will see you guys next time. If you find any more information about the Denver, New Orleans, put it in that server. If you're interested in Denver, New Orleans yourself, come out, go on the old line, like, learn. This is probably Colorado's most important railroad, as I said, because one, it stopped any and all narrow gauge on the front range from staying there. It stopped the Denver Rio Grande from existing as a narrow gauge railroad on the front range. It stopped. It created the Colorado Midland Railroad, which I'm not proud of. But if Elminar is still here watching, and if you want to show Hellgate Scenic this road did create technically because Midland came around in 1883. This was in Pueblo by 1882, so this created the Midland, which would cause the Denver Rio Grande, the standard gauge, north into the Rockies, or west into the Rockies, and then it also would give way to the Colorado Joint Line, of course, and then also the ATSF expanding all the way to Denver. So yeah, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Join the Discord server, learn about this road yourself, look up anything you would like on this railroad. Some stuff may not be accurate because certain websites like the town of Parker say it went to Franktown, even though Franktown never had a railroad in its existence. But yeah. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a nice rest of your day. Goodbye.